I'm in the Cavalry and Guards Club, and today I'm going to be interviewing Sir David Omand, former head of GCHQ, Intelligence and Security Coordinator in the Cabinet Office. And today we're going to be discussing the secrets of intelligence for the National Centre for Military Intelligence. Sir David, it's a huge honour to be interviewing you today. And I've really enjoyed your book, How Spies Think. It's given us a lot to digest and think about. And if I can ask you some questions about that today. You quote one of Winston Churchill's favourite sayings. Tell me about this.
It's quite a profound saying. The further back you look, the more you can see the long-term patterns in history. History doesn't repeat itself, but you can get that sense of how it might evolve. And if you want to explain why things are the rather curious way they are today, look back before you start to look forward.
Can military intelligence give us the skills for life today? And if so, what kind of examples would there be for that?
It's one of the reasons I wrote the book. Partly to talk about the craft of intelligence itself, which I've been involved in, but also because those lessons can be applied. I mean, let me take a very simple example. You've decided to move, or you want to move house, out of the city, say to a village in the countryside. Well, the first thing you've got to do is establish what the military intelligence officer would call situational awareness. What's the village like? Where's the nearest doctor? Where's the nearest hospital? Are there shops? Are there schools, if that's relevant? And then you work out what can you afford. So you put those together, and you may discover, for example, that the house prices are a bit lower than you expected. This takes you to the second thing the intelligence officer would be doing, which is trying to explain, why am I seeing these facts on the ground? Is it because there's a giant new housing development, or a railway track is going to be built through the village, or whatever? So you explain what you see, and then of course you have to put them together, and you have to make an estimate of what would life be like? How would things unfold? And it's as well to do all that in your mind before you plunge in and take the big step.
So it's having the information, it's information gathering to be able to inform decision making,
Yes,
I
but
guess.
it's more than that. It's also explaining the information. And that's the bit that history shows us the intelligence analysts quite often get wrong, because they may be dealing with a very different kind of person, a dictator, for example, and they're trying to second guess what's the next move. So you have facts on the ground, you have situational awareness. Sometimes it may be a bit patchy. You never have complete intelligence. But then you have to do the jigsaw puzzle, and you have to try and discover what is the picture that the puzzle is giving you. And that's explanation, because you do have to remember that facts by themselves are capable of being interpreted in many different ways. I'll give you a simple example. Suppose a young man is up in front of the magistrate, accused of throwing a bottle at a police officer during a bit of a riot. The evidence is his fingerprints on the fragments of the bottle, incontrovertible. Yet up comes a defense lawyer who says, well, that bottle was in my client's recycling box. The mob rushed past, they picked it up. That's how his fingerprints got on the bottle. So the same fact can be interpreted in many different ways. And in military intelligence, it's really important to understand that, because the adversary, the enemy, may well be trying to deceive you and putting so-called facts in your way. And if you're not careful, you'll misunderstand those.
Yeah. And I guess also in contemporary times, of course, there's the whole issue of security, and we think of technology and online security. Isn't this really just for the experts, or do you think that it should be pretty robust for the ordinary public?
All of us I include myself and you, we can all do a great deal to make ourselves more secure by simple things. That won't stop the Russian professional cyber hackers, but it will leave us much more secure against the criminals who are trying to defraud us. So, you know, when was the last time you changed your passwords? Do you have the right way of constructing a password? The GCHQ advice is very simple. Take 3 short words that mean something together to you, but are not related to each other, and then put them together. No password guessing program is going to come up with the answer and guess that. So it might be Helen, Cavalry and Museum. Now, no outsider is going to guess those 3 words together, but put them together and you've got to add a number, perhaps 22 this year, and you've got a good password. The other thing is to keep all your apps up to date. I mean, most people have phones that have lots of apps or laptops, and it's really important to update them because all this software has flaws in it, and the criminals exploit the flaws, they find them. And that's when the companies issue updates. So when you get something saying that there are some updates in the App Store, you must install them. If you can do it, then go for 2-factor authentication.
Yes.
Banks do that now, and
if
you want to pay for something on the internet, it's much better to do it on a site that has that double authentication. It makes it much harder for a criminal to impersonate you.
Can I ask you about, in your book, you talk about negotiations and how this can fail, even in spite of good intelligence. Do you want to comment on that? Because I found that section of your book really intriguing.
Well, we all have to engage in negotiations, and governments, of course, have very serious negotiations. Sometimes it's to stop a war or to prepare a treaty. The whole point about a negotiation is it's between 2 parties, and at the end each party must come away with something that's important to them, but they won't come away with everything that's important to them. So there's a compromise. You've arrived at a compromise. At the end of your car buying spree, you've got the car, the garage has the money. But if one side in a negotiation pushes it too far, then you get resentment. And you may get a signature on the deal, but what will happen is that party will then do everything in their power to recover what they think you cheated them out of by your negotiation. So getting the right level of trustworthiness between parties in a negotiation. That's why Ronald Reagan's favourite old Russian saying was trust but verify. If you think your adversary, the person you're negotiating with, is in fact trustworthy, and you can establish quite clearly what they need to get out of it and what you need to get out of it, then you can work in between and on the margins to make sure both parties are satisfied. Otherwise, deals, agreements, even treaties come apart very quickly.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I found that interesting in the book that we can translate these skills which people would think of being very high level to ordinary everyday life, and that I think is so valuable. And during your time at GCHQ, were there any particular challenges that you're allowed to talk about that stand out for you?
Yes, I mean there were 2 big challenges, and both are very public knowledge. The first was the Cold War had ended, and GCHQ, with a lot of military intelligence personnel helping, had generated over the years intelligence, not just on the Soviet Union, but on the Warsaw Pact, the Czechoslovakia, Poland, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria. They were now on our side. They were joining NATO. So the whole structure and indeed the specialized staff that had focused on the military capabilities of those countries were no longer needed. So they had to be switched to other tasks, and sadly, in some cases, they had to be made redundant or given retirement. So that was a big upheaval, and it took quite a few years. Stations in Germany, for example, were closed. They weren't needed anymore. And the other big upheaval was the arrival of the internet and the digital world, which was just creeping into sight when I was director in the mid-1990s. Hotmail existed, but Google didn't. It was a research program somewhere in Stanford University, I think. Social media had not been invented, but you could see very clearly that within a few years the whole world of intelligence was going to be transformed. And so the challenge for GCHQ was to move from a largely analog world into a digital world. And here we are in 2022, and they've achieved that magnificently.
Have the threats actually changed since your time as director, or are they the same but in different clothing, so to speak?
It depends on how you want to define a threat. The human nature hasn't changed, at least I haven't noticed it changing. So countries still vie with each other for power and influence. Non-state groups like terrorist groups still from time to time attack us. You have serious criminal groups. The medium of exchange has changed, so a lot of this takes place in the digital world. But state-on-state tension and sometimes violence, as we see today in Ukraine, is still with us, and we still have a terrorist threat, and there is a very serious organised criminal threat.
So in this age as before, partnerships must be really crucial. And again, it's something which you do talk about in your book. Do you want to comment on that? Is there anything specific that you would like to highlight about the importance of partnerships?
In the book, I use the example of the wonderful United States-United Kingdom intelligence partnership, which has been written about rather a lot, and which, if you like, really started in earnest at Bletchley Park during the Second World War, continued through the Korean War, continued through the Cold War, continued after 9/11 particularly, in dealing with international terrorism, and they're working together today on assessing Russia's activities, its invasion of Ukraine. It's a very deep partnership in the signals intelligence world, but also in other areas of intelligence, such as military intelligence. And in the book, what I wanted to do was to explain what lies behind a partnership between two sovereign states in an area of such secrecy and such sensitivity as secret intelligence. And the answer is it takes a long time, but you build up a reputation for being trustworthy, for doing what you say you would do, for guarding the other person's secrets very carefully. You learn a lot mutually about each other when you have this sort of partnership, and you mustn't ever exploit it to your own selfish advantage, as it were, as a country. You build that up over a long period since the Second World War, and you have what we have today. And that's a lesson for businesses that are looking for business partners, for example. It takes time. It takes a lot of effort. It has to be led from the top down, saying these are now our partners, these are the people we're going to work with. Sadly, in the business world, the evidence is that few partnerships last. And that, I suspect, is because the parties can't resist the temptation to try and get one over the other party when they get the opportunity. But what lies behind it is the thought that when you're in trouble, your partner will come to your aid, knowing that if the tables are reversed, you'll be coming to their aid, and they can always rely on you. So I mentioned in the book, for example, that the United States National Security Agency contingency plan after 9/11, if there had been a massive attack on that agency, was that GCHQ would take over temporarily the running of the systems that are essential for United States national security. And the NSA knew that they could rely on GCHQ doing that. And the same, I'm quite sure, is true the other way around.
It's back to that trust again. And I guess once that trust is broken, at any point it's incredibly hard, isn't it, to rebuild that?
It takes years to build up a reputation for being trustworthy. But it can be destroyed very quickly. And that's why partnerships take care. You have to nurture them. And if you look in the intelligence world, it's generation after generation introducing each other, saying, this is somebody you can trust. And that gets passed on, mother to daughter, father to son.
You, of course, touch on Russia and President Putin and the threat surrounding that and diversionary tactics, and of course the Salisbury poisonings in March 2018. Do you think it's a tactical or perhaps even a strategic change on the part of Russia?
I think the best way to understand it is to see this as part of a mindset. It's a zero-sum game, that what is bad for us is good for Russia. That's what they think.
Right.
And therefore something perhaps is, if they can inflict on us problems, trouble, seek to widen disparities in society, digitally exploit the social media, create that kind of trouble. It distracts governments.
Yes.
It undermines faith in the social media. It actually undermines faith in rationality. People stop trying to work out who was responsible for this because there's so much disinformation. We saw that after the Salisbury poisonings. And it's not a strategic game plan, as I read it, to achieve one specific objective. It's just a general feeling that if you can make their life difficult, go on, do it.
A sort of destabilising of democracy, which I guess is...
And it keeps us off balance.
Yeah.
And if you have that view of security, Russian security in the Kremlin, you think, well, that's good, they're off balance.
How did Britain respond to the Salisbury poisonings, or perhaps you want to comment a bit wider on Russian tactics in general? How did we respond?
The awful events in Salisbury, including the death of Dawn Sturgis, totally innocent British civilian, through the use of this illegal nerve agent, Novichok. The British response was measured, it was calm. It was very clear that the intelligence authorities in the UK had looked at all the possible explanations and had concluded there was no other rational explanation other than the Russian military intelligence agency, the GRU, was responsible. The response by the UK was within the law. The suspects were identified, they were named, they, as it were, been charged. They'll never stand trial because the Russians will never allow them to. But it was a process that was driven, I think, by a very decent response to a very indecent, disgraceful activity. What is so significant is that the rest of the world saw the way the United Kingdom was responding and respected that. And that led to huge agreement that the activity of Russian intelligence officers in all these states had gone too far, and it led to the large-scale expulsion of Russian officers, not just from the United Kingdom and the United States, and from our European allies, and from Australia, New Zealand, Canada, but other countries as well said, we know there are hostile intelligence agents in our cities, we are going to expel them. So the result of this Russian activity was a major, major blow being made against Russian intelligence.
And probably something that Russia didn't anticipate.
I'm sure they did.
Yeah.
The response to the Litvinenko poisoning a few years earlier with polonium-210 radioactive substance, which was a horrible way to kill someone.
Horrific.
But that response was not as strong as the Salisbury response. So I think lessons were learned after the Litvinenko killing.
As you say, in terms of being robust in response and
But measured, building a coalition of friendly countries to say this, using a nerve agent, an illegal nerve agent on British soil is just not acceptable.
No. And if we kind of go back to the military intelligence, what do you see as the challenges for military intelligences today?
The biggest challenge, I think, must be information. The sheer volume of information which is now available and which may have to be processed really very, very quickly to support a commander engaged in a military operation, or even more quickly if it's a cyber attack that has to be frustrated, where the time available was maybe just minutes before the damage is done. And there are so many sources of digital intelligence. We've heard in the Ukraine case of mobile telephones being used by the Russian side, being intercepted by the Ukrainians, targets being identified, and a number of Russian generals have been killed, so it is said, as a result of that. We have photographic material, which is now digital. So all those drones can be up photographing the battlefield. I wouldn't want to be a tank commander trying to hide my tank when there are all these drones around. In a few years back, it was of course only the very major states who could afford satellite reconnaissance. But now, of course, you can get very high resolution digital imagery from drones. But of course, what are you going to do with all that? You have vast databases of digital information, and somehow it's got to be sorted. The key bits of information that will really help the commander with his mission or protect his force, they've got to be identified and passed on. So the task has, I think, become really very difficult, although the power of this information, as we've seen in Ukraine, the power of it is gives an entirely new dimension to warfare.
And there's a good example, Ukraine, isn't it, where democracy is fragile in a number of countries, and particularly I think in the West. Are we seeing the decline of the West, do you think? What are the challenges in we have to fight for democracy in every generation?
What we've seen since the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022 is NATO getting a new lease of life. Our old friends, the Swedes and the Finns, actually applying to join the alliance after years and years of neutrality. That's a big step, and what it shows is confidence, that countries have confidence that in alliance and across the Atlantic with the United States and Canada, we are stronger. And that's a powerful signal. A few years back, at the time of the 2016 US presidential election, we saw democracy in real danger. Some of that danger has passed, and we saw that in 2020 when there was another US presidential election. And they were ready. The authorities were ready. They spotted some of the dirty tricks that the Russians were trying to play, and they frustrated them.
So David, I understand you're incredibly excited about this vision for the new National Centre for Military Intelligence. What do you see as its importance, and why should we have this new centre, this new museum?
I think every profession, and intelligence is a profession, and military intelligence is a very important part of that profession, needs to know where it comes from, needs to know its history. And although some of the history is, of course, still deeply secret, an awful lot of it isn't. And we can learn about the extraordinary exploits which were carried out. mostly successful, some not successful, but you can learn from the failures as well as the successes. And I think the nation needs to be able to understand what were all those people doing in military intelligence, and how was it that their work, sometimes dangerous, their work actually contributed to keeping this country safe. And they deserve to know that. And I think the centre is a great idea.
Sir David, thank you so much for being willing to be honest and sharing with me today in this interview for the National Centre for Military Intelligence. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Helen.
This has been a production for the National Centre for Military Intelligence. To find out more and to support the NCMI, please visit ncmi.co.uk.